I want to go across now, live and exclusive to Washington, D.C., where I'm joined by a special guest, arguably America's top India expert. We're joined by Ashley Tellis. He served in the National Security Council staff as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Strategic Planning in Southwest Asia. He helped bring together the India-America nuclear deal, and very few people have seen the whole arc of evolution of India-America ties from as close quarters as Ashley Tellis has. So, Mr. Tellis, for taking out time on an important day, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be with you again.
I want to start by asking you, Mr. Tellis, about your key takeaways from that joint statement. There's so much talk about just the visual spectacle, but you've been through the details with a very fine-tooth comb. From your lens, what's the message Prime Minister Modi and President Trump are sending to each other's countries and to the rest of the world in the formal joint statement that was put out at the end of the visit?
So let me start by identifying what I thought was the primary objective of Prime Minister Modi's visit. It was essentially to convince President Trump that India was a great partner for the United States and that India shared in the success of his ambitions. And by doing so, I think he also wanted to gain a measure of immunity from Trump's more problematic policies, especially in the area of trade. My judgment after watching a day and a half of interactions here in DC is that the Prime Minister succeeded magnificently on all counts. In fact, I think it was a Modi makes magic visit because it's very hard to disarm a personality like President Trump, but just watching their interactions during the presser after the day's conversations, I think he had achieved exactly what he set out to do.
Why do you feel this way? Because the other way of looking at this, which is the perspective the Indian opposition is putting out, is that it's a bit embarrassing for Prime Minister Trump to be in DC on the day that these reciprocal tariffs announced in a press conference. In the press conference, he repeatedly picks on India, repeats that in the presence of Prime Minister Modi. Is that, from your lens, just a negotiating tactic, or are we seeing this time a less warm, a less effusive, more transactional, more business-like Donald Trump?
No, I think there are some things that are Trump's fixations which are not going to go away. Tariffs are one of those. And India is going to get tarred by those tariffs no matter what. But I think the space has now opened up for a negotiation. The commitments that India has made to buy additional US defense equipment, to create greater market access for US commodities, these are the things that, ring like music in Trump's ears. And so we've not heard the last of this. So think of this as a process that is occurring in parallel. In general, Trump is going to pursue a tariffs-heavy economic policy that is going to be aimed at the global trading system. But he will be willing to make deals individually with countries based on what he sees as their importance to US interests. And I think India is clearly now in that category. I mean, it always was, but it's wonderful to see Trump acknowledging that. And I think he was very, very clear on that point, that he sees India as a partner on a whole range of issues. And the joint statement, I think, elaborates that in great detail.
They've also spoken of the F-35 stealth fighter jet being offered to India. Now, this is prohibitively costly. There's no talk of transfer of technology in these stealth fighters. You were involved personally in the nuclear deal. Do you think this is something that India should be considering, given the geostrategic considerations? Or do you think that we'd much rather be better off with a country like France or a more reliable defense partner? And why I say this is because there was so much fanfare around the GE 404 engines being offered to India during President Biden's visit. Ultimately, we still are waiting for those engines. So how reliable is America as a defense supplier to India? We've got a history of insecurity with American supplies. The recent experience isn't very heartening either.
Well, I think the offer to supply F-35s eventually, and I emphasize the word eventually because President Trump went out of his way to say this is a pathway to the eventual offering of an F-35. I think that is a symbol of Mr. Trump's willingness to put things on the table that previously were off the table. But whether it is the answer to India's challenges where it comes to its air power deficits, I think requires more examination. There are some things that I think one can be confident about. I think it would be very hard to agree to co producing F 35s in India. I mean, the technology is something that the United States guards very zealously. We've done co production agreements with only a very few US allies, and those agreements were done at the beginning of the program. As you point out, the aircraft is expensive. There will be all kinds of security and monitoring issues involved if there is actually a sale of the aircraft, monitoring that India may not feel particularly comfortable with. So I think, there are issues that still have to be resolved if India decides to go in that direction. There's also the larger question, and I think you were hinting about that in your question. And that larger question is, can India integrate the F-35 in its Air Force, given that it has already now gone down the path of acquiring Rafales for its medium combat aircraft role? Where would the F-35 fit into the Indian Air Force's force structure? These are all issues that I think we will have an opportunity to discuss in times to come. But I see the F-35 offer as a symbol that is intended to convey to India that the US will not be unwilling to offer it the best defense technology possible.
Interesting. Let's now talk about the trade deal that clearly talks have to begin very soon. There's a window till the 2nd of April, after which the tariffs could come into play. Do you think there's enough time, given the fact that the Commerce Secretary hasn't yet been ratified? That's still a work in progress. There was talk and negotiation on a limited trade deal, which ran into trouble the last time. India has very serious concerns about the import of agricultural products, dairy products, which are big asks from the United States. If Robert Lighthizer and Piyush Goyal couldn't resolve it the last time round, how do you view the probability of being able to get a trade deal going, a bilateral trade agreement going in this month and a half between now and the 2nd of April?
I think it is going to be tough. There's no question about it. And it's not only the issues at commerce, it's also USTR, which I presume, the US Trade Representative's Office, which I presume will take the lead in these negotiations. So getting a deal that has involved very, very sticky challenges in the past, by the time April rolls around, I think may be hard. But the important thing is this, to my mind. The negotiation should begin in earnest, and there should be clear evidence that both sides are negotiating in good faith. And if we can at least put those building blocks on the table before April, then I think there may be ways in which India can be afforded some waivers before the universal tariff regime comes into play.
President Trump indicated that apart from Tahavur Rana, he'd be willing to consider, and we have a list of at least 12 most wanted people who are in the United States. Do you see there being a marked difference in the tolerance seen in the Biden administration to anti-India operatives who are residing happily on US soil and the way the Trump government views it? Or do you see there not being much of a difference?
I think Trump clearly wants to be as cooperative as possible with India, but the structural challenges are still going to remain, right? If these individuals are US citizens, then it gets extremely complicated because the executive branch simply cannot, extradite individuals without the courts having a say in the matter and so on and so forth. If these are non-US citizens, then I think it's a different story. So I think that issue will have to be examined on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, let's also speak of the personal bonhomie and the fact that President Trump invited Prime Minister Modi so early on in his term. So we've seen the Prime Minister of Israel, we've seen the Prime Minister of Japan, we've seen the King of Jordan amongst those who've come. How much, because there's a big debate in India about whether it's the right thing to go so early in your visit, because one perspective is he barely got any time with the American president. He went there last evening. President Trump kind of kept him hanging till the afternoon, met him only at 3 o'clock. There was no state dinner. It didn't have the pomp and show of the last visit. The other, which is the Jaishankar point, is to get in there early. Get in there early, make your point, get some mind space. Which of the two do you think in the end turned out to be the right strategy?
Well, I think Minister Jaishankar's calculation was spot on. Given the mercurial quality of President Trump's administration and the behaviors that have been adopted so far, I think it served India's interests better to be in the queue early, to be helping to define what the contours of the engagement would be, not only immediately, but over the long term. And I think it really helped, this visit really helped to get Trump to focus on India's value for US interests. And I think he mentioned that a couple of times in the presser. So I am tempted to conclude that this was actually the smart thing to do. There will always be opportunities for future engagements, right? The president has committed to visiting India for the Quad Leaders Summit sometime later this year. There will be an intense round of bilateral agreements on discussions on trade, on defense, and so on and so forth. But the point is to get leader level attention very early on, I think is always a smart play. And I'm glad that India made it.
Ashley, Tellis for taking out time and joining us. Thank you.